What school was like in 1960s Britain. The 1960s were a defining decade for Britain, an age of rock and roll, swinging fashion, and cultural transformation. But while the Beatles ruled the airwaves and Carnaby Street dazzled with new styles, school life remained rooted in chalkboards, uniforms, and discipline. What school was like in 1960s, Britain was both familiar and foreign compared to today. Strict classrooms, free milk bottles, and playground laughter were balanced with an education system standing at the crossroads of tradition and reform. For children growing up in this era, school became a shared memory that continues to stir nostalgia decades later. Discipline and authority, the cane and the classroom. Discipline was the heartbeat of 1960s schooling. Teachers, often called masters or mistresses, were figures of authority, and few pupils dared to challenge them. Corporal punishment was not only permitted but expected. The cane, the ruler, or the slipper were ever-present tools for enforcing order. A trip to the headmaster's office could mean sore hands or legs, yet parents generally supported such measures, believing discipline at school prepared children for life. Lessons followed strict timetables. Silence was mandatory, and pupils were required to stand when answering questions, showing respect for both the subject and the authority figure before them. Even small infractions like whispering or slouching could draw stern reprimands. While some classrooms felt intimidating, others were warmer, shaped by teachers who combined discipline with encouragement. Yet, the fact remains. Corporal punishment wasn't banned in state schools until the Education Number 2 Act of 1986. For pupils of the 1960s, obedience was non-negotiable and school authority was absolute. Uniforms and identity, dressing the part. Uniforms were the outward sign of belonging, and in British schools in the 1960s, they were near universal. Boys endured gray blazers, ties, caps, and short trousers well into their teens, braving cold winters with bare knees. Girls donned gym slips, pleated skirts, and crisp blouses, often finished with knee-high socks and sensible shoes polished daily. Uniforms went beyond appearance. They symbolized discipline, created unity, and erased some, but not all, social differences. A grammar school badge on a blazer was a badge of pride, while secondary modern pupils had plainer attire, subtly reflecting the hierarchy of the era. For many former pupils, the scratch of wool blazers, the fiddly ties, and the caps that blew away in the wind are unforgettable memories. Love them or loathe them, uniforms were woven into the very fabric of school life in 1960s Britain. The 11+, a life-changing test. Perhaps nothing shaped education in 1960s Britain more than the 11+ exam. Introduced by the 1944 Education Act, this test determined whether an 11-year-old child entered a grammar school, a secondary modern, or, very rarely, a technical school. Passing the 11+ opened doors to O-levels and potentially university, while failing often meant leaving school at 15 with limited qualifications. Critics argued that the system reinforced class divides, rewarding children with educated or supportive families and disadvantaging many working-class pupils. Technical schools, though planned, were scarce, leaving most pupils in either grammar or secondary moderns. This stark division caused lifelong differences in opportunity. For many who grew up during the era, the 11+ wasn't just an exam, it was a fork in the road that determined their path in life. The tools of learning: chalk, ink, and blackboards. Classrooms in the 1960s had a distinct rhythm. Blackboards ruled the room, chalk squeaked across their surfaces, and cleaning the board was a daily ritual often given to pupils as a task. The smell of chalk dust and the sight of teachers wielding wooden pointers were part of everyday life. Desks were solid and often scarred with carvings from generations of pupils. Many had built-in inkwells, and fountain pens with blotting paper were the standard tools of writing. Good handwriting was considered essential. Sloppy script was corrected repeatedly, as neat penmanship reflected discipline and respectability. Textbooks were worn and shared, exercise books were carefully covered in brown paper, and rote learning dominated. Multiplication tables, spelling, and poetry recitations were drilled until memorized. Film strips and reel-to-reel projectors occasionally added excitement, but they were novelties rather than regular features. This was an age before calculators and digital tools. Mental arithmetic and handwriting skills were the cornerstones of going to school in 1960s Britain. School dinners and free milk. Food at school was simple, hearty, and unforgettable. Canteens across the country served meat and 2 veg dishes, lamb stew, cottage pie, or mince with mashed potatoes, designed to keep children nourished. Puddings such as jam roly-poly, spotted dick, or semolina followed, often swimming in custard. One of the most iconic aspects of 1960s education was free school milk. Introduced in 1946, it was delivered daily in small glass bottles with straws. For some, it was a welcome refreshment. For others, lukewarm milk was dreaded. Yet it symbolized the government's commitment to child health. Policy changes began in the late 1960s. In 1968, free milk was withdrawn from secondary schools. By 1971, it was also removed for children over 7 in England and Wales, giving rise to the political nickname Milk Snatcher. Still, in the 1960s, the little bottles remained a central part of school life in 1960s Britain. Playtime and playground culture. Despite the strictness of classrooms, playtime was the highlight of the school day. Playgrounds were alive with energy, echoing with laughter and games. Boys played football with tennis balls or even improvised with rolled-up socks. Girls skipped rope, chalked hopscotch squares, or gathered for hand-clapping games. Seasonal favorites like conkers saw children threading horse chestnuts onto strings and smashing them together in competitions. Marbles jingled in pockets, traded and battled during break times. Play equipment was minimal, often just a tarmac yard and perhaps a few goalposts, but imagination made up the difference. These moments of freedom gave children the space to bond, release energy, and make lifelong friendships. For many, the playground remains one of the most cherished parts of going to school in 1960s Britain. The curriculum, from Latin to domestic science. The curriculum of the 1960s reflected the deep divides created by the 11+. Grammar schools taught academic subjects such as English literature, mathematics, history, geography, Latin, and the sciences. They prepared pupils for O-levels, and those who stayed beyond 16 might continue to A-levels. Secondary moderns leaned towards practical training. Boys studied woodwork, metalwork, and technical drawing, while girls often learned cookery, sewing, and domestic science, reflecting the gender roles of the time. In the 1960s, compulsory schooling ended at 15. Pupils who remained until 16 could sit O-levels. From 1965, the Certificate of Secondary Education, CSE, offered an alternative qualification, aimed at a wider range of abilities and subjects. Though sometimes seen as second best compared to O-levels, it gave many pupils opportunities for recognition they wouldn't have otherwise had. This balance of academic and practical education highlighted the rigid expectations of society: boys to work, girls to manage homes, yet also showed the first hints of a more flexible and inclusive future. Winds of change: the road to comprehensive education. By the mid-1960s, winds of reform were blowing. The Robbins Report of 1963 had expanded access to higher education, encouraging more young people to consider university. In 1965, Circular 10/65 urged local authorities to reorganize schools into comprehensives, ending the old grammar/secondary modern divide. Not every area adopted the comprehensive model immediately, and selection remained in place in many regions. Yet the seeds were planted. Over the coming decades, comprehensives would reshape British schooling. Meanwhile, broader cultural shifts were influencing education. Youth culture was challenging authority. Music, fashion, and television gave children a sense of identity outside the classroom. Social change was trickling into schools, loosening rigid hierarchies and opening doors to new ideas. Thus, what school was like in 1960s Britain can be seen as the final chapter of one era and the prologue to another. The last decade dominated by strict selection before comprehensives and modern reforms reshaped education for good. School in 1960s Britain was a blend of stern discipline, chalk-stained classrooms, and cherished traditions, yet also of playground freedom, shared milk bottles, and friendships that lasted a lifetime. It mirrored the social divides of its time while laying the groundwork for reform. Looking back, it remains one of Britain's most nostalgic eras. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.